US President Joe Biden will deliver an Oval Office address in the next few hours where he's expected to call for continued funding for Israel and Ukraine. Joining us live now, former senior CIA official who managed significant programs in the Middle East, Norman Roule. Norman, it's good to see you again, good to speak to you again as well. So just looking at those pictures of Israel's Defence Minister this morning speaking to his troops, readying them for war, basically, do you suspect now that a ground incursion is imminent?
Good morning. There are many signs that a ground incursion is imminent. It may not be exactly what people expected, but this is a tremendously consequential day for President Biden's speech. In addition to the imminent ground incursion, we have missiles fired by Iran proxies Houthis in Yemen against Israel. We also have drone attacks against American personnel in Iraq, and there are press reports that one American contractor suffered a fatal cardiac incident. This is a very consequential moment for President Biden.
Okay, just back on your first point there where you say a ground incursion may not be what people expected. What do you mean by that?
Well, when people think of a ground incursion into Gaza, it's all 350,000 Israelis moving forward at once. Israel has used the last 13 days to shape the battle space with air attacks, to eliminate a number of senior Hamas officials, to degrade their command and communications, collapse tunnels, and restrict the movement of some Gaza-based Hamas personnel. Israel is very aware of the need to avoid civilian casualties. They've heard this from multiple U.S. and foreign officials and their own leadership. So they're going to try to do something which has never been done before, which is to undertake such an operation in a densely populated labyrinthine area without a significant number of civilian casualties. So I think this is going to be interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen this in the past with prior ground invasions. I mean, avoiding civilian casualties, very difficult though when Hamas operatives are working in densely populated areas, in built-up neighbourhoods, in hospitals, in mosques, in schools where civilians are.
All that is correct. All Iranian proxies work from within densely populated civilian areas because the civilians act as a shield. And when civilians are killed, they become a propaganda point and actually a recruiting theme in the local neighborhoods. I should also note that many of Hamas's weapons storage sites are built under civilian areas. So when a storage site is hit in another location, the explosion sometimes carries through a tunnel and destroys the building with civilians. This is a very challenging environment.
Collective punishment. It's a term that's been used by quite a few people now, and it is a war crime, that is true. But when you associate Hamas with hiding behind a civilian population to launch its attacks, does the same rule apply there, or does that kind of muddy the waters to that war crime terminology?
Well, collective punishment is a war crime and does apply. And the Houthis do hide behind civilians. Hamas does hide behind civilians, just as the Houthis do, just as Lebanese Hezbollah does. But Israel would say it is certainly not applying collective punishment. It is basically restricting the access to some aid that it previously gave, electricity and water, but 92% of Gaza's water come from local aquifers, only 6% from Israel. So Israel would say there are alternatives, although it's a very poor area. And President Biden did leave Israel with a commitment from Israeli leadership to allow aid to come into Rafah. But again, if you're Israel, you want to make sure the aid isn't bringing in weapons, that Houthis don't steal the aid as they've done from UN facilities this week and use it for military purposes. So there are legitimate concerns on behalf of Israel.
Okay, and just finally, Norman, you mentioned Yemen and you mentioned some other attacks that are taking place throughout the Middle East at the moment. Is this evidence of a regional war and the potential for one?
I think we need to be careful there. There are now comments going around that this is Iran's decision, that this is a regional war. We're watching a highly inflamed press environment in the Middle East. We're watching groups with a strong anti-Israel bias with heavy weapons. It's not unreasonable they would use these. It's not unreasonable Iran would tell them to use a certain number sufficient to punish Israel and to threaten a war, but not so significant that it would immediately involve the United States in a war that would destabilize the region. Iran is still the winner in this because of the nature of these attacks.